Hi, thanks for joining us for this short video introduction telling about the founding vision of the Faith-Based Security Network and why it's set up as a 501c3 membership association. So let's get right into the history. For some reason, the Lord allowed me a front row seat at two significant incidents at faith-based organizations. And observing those details was consistent with the emerging need for faith based security being recognized across the country. Prior to the year 2000, the term church security didn't hardly exist. And when we had our first incident in 1996, when I was held hostage at Focus on the Family, prior to that, when we had done our planning, there just wasn't many resources out there for us to tap into to find others who were doing this. So at the end of the hostage situation is when I began doing the research, and that turned into the deadly force incident research that we still do today. And that was originally just to have information to see, is this a real issue? Is there a need for faith-based security? And the more I studied, the more I realized there was. And put together all that research, and that research is still used by many others. It was used by me when I finally went to our church, New Life Church, there in Colorado Springs, and we were able to talk the administration into letting us put together an intentional program. And you'll hear me talk a lot about the need for an intentional program. And that's what we did at New Life Church in 2005. So then in November of 2006 is when we had our pastor scandal. This was the Ted Haggard scandal that rocked us to our core, and we thought that that was probably the most significant incident that we would ever face as a security team. But it wasn't long after that. In fact, it was only 14 months after that that we had the murder scene there at New Life Church. And this is where a guy came in and killed two girls in the parking lot and was stopped by our security operations within 60 feet of coming in the door. So all of this had gone into my observations and records of what happens in a significant incident. And we started, at that time, started talking with other churches, and we developed the Colorado Springs Coalition. And that was in 2009. We began to recognize the importance of churches working together and having some communication between all the local faith-based organizations and law enforcement and things of that nature. And we began to work really well together in that sharing of information, and we avoided some major incidents by having that information. And then in 2012 is when the book came out, and all of this observing that I'd been seeing went into that book, and was released as information basis for justifying the great endeavor. I call this an endeavor. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but it was the case for faith-based security. And during all this time, I started speaking in lots of churches. Between 1997 and 2016, I was able to travel and speak in 40 different states. And whenever you travel to another place and you speak, you also hear other speakers, you meet people who've been doing this, you hear of other things. So the information database was building huge. And then I began to think, what do I do with all this information? Do I take it all and turn it into a business plan and launch some kind of a church security business? Or do I just share it for a little bit and then box it up and take the rest of all this information and the momentum of the deadly force incident study and all that stuff? Do I box it up and take it with me to the grave Do I claim it as my own intellectual property and try to sell it or pass it on to a family? But I began recognizing that I'm not building an estate, and I saw the problems going on in this great endeavor, jockeying for position and notoriety. And besides all the jockeying for position that I saw that we were still stovepipes and silos of information. Nobody was sharing things beyond their tightest circles. There was very little collective acumen. There was a lot of opinions, but people weren't getting together and finding the larger picture from a wider group of people. And there was no sustainability at all. So as I looked at all these issues with what was happening in this great endeavor, and I call it a great endeavor because we've hung different labels on it through the years. We've called it a movement, a industry, a grassroots effort. But really, more than anything, I call it a great endeavor of church security. And I wanted to take all that information and momentum that we've just been talking about and all this ideas, and I wanted to make it count. I wanted to find a way of improving and sharing information. And to do that, I wanted to see a meaningful and vetted membership. I wanted to make sure we had some way of having institutional memory where things aren't said and lost. Wanted to develop coalitions. I had seen the value of coalitions. I wanted some sort of an organization that could invigorate people to start coalitions and to share best-in-class products, best resources, best practices. I wanted a way that we could share threat information. And I mean realistic, timely, relative threat information that helps us avoid some incidents, not respond to everything, but help us to actually avoid some situations. I also wanted it to have a legislative impact and be recognized as an associated voice where we're making church security operators, those volunteers who are doing this, be recognized and accepted without putting them through bureaucratic legislative licenses and things of that nature. I wanted them to be able to serve their churches without it being a overbearing expense and difficult to maintain. And the other thing that this whole endeavor needed and still needs is benchmarking. And we've already started doing some of that. You don't know what's normal until you've recorded what others are doing. We needed benchmarking. And as I thought of all this, I thought it needs to be a 501c3. For one thing, it needs to be Christian-centered and Christian-ran. That is the plumb line by which everything else in this association has to measure against, is the Christ-centeredness of it. I've always said that the individual team members need to be ambassadors of Christ. More than anything, this organization, the membership association, needs to be Christ-centered. And we're not building an estate. I'm not working to try to build some huge retirement. This information, this database, this momentum, this great endeavor belongs to the people who are developing it. It isn't entitled information to me or anybody else. It's for all of us, and it needs to be passed on. And the best way to do that is with a 501c3 type organization. And another reason we wanted it to be 501c3 is because a growing number of churches only allow other 501c3s to speak at their church and to bring an event there. And I started seeing that issue where if you're not a 501c3, you can't speak in some churches. And so that was another reason for it being a 501c3. Even though the FBSN is not a church, it is a faith-based organization just like those that we serve. And as part of that, another big part of that is succession planning. This is not something I'm going to take to the grave with me. This is something that somebody else someday will step in and they'll take it to the next level. The FBSN is a Christian-based professional membership association dedicated to enhancing the professionalism and connectivity of ministry security operators, along with supporting ministry leaders, law enforcement, and first responders, plus professional affiliate providers of products and services. So now that you've seen the founding vision of the FBSN and you learned why it's a 501c3, why it will always be Christ-centered and member-centric and member-driven, we want to invite you to consider becoming a part of it as we move this great endeavor forward.